and welcome to Motorsport Speak, a motorsport podcast brought to you by Motorsport Monday and motorsportweek.com. My name's Dan Lawrence, and joining me today is Jack Oliver Smith, one of our hard-working, intrepid reporters on the Motorsport Monday digital magazine and motorsportweek.com news site. And we're here to talk about the Formula One Las Vegas Grand Prix, F1's second race on the streets of Sin City, the city that never sleeps. It's got many nicknames, all of them worthy. And this year's race was a marked improvement on the first event. We didn't have any drain covers interrupting proceedings. I think ticket prices were a bit more manageable. From my experience and from what people have told me, the paddock was a better place to be. But more importantly, this year's race crowned a Formula One world champion, Max Verstappen, going 4 for 4 in the last 4 seasons. And he joins a very VIP sort of list of F1 drivers to have succeeded in 4 successive world titles, which I'm sure we'll come to. But first of all, let's just sort of talk about our feelings and sort of personal review of the race. Jack, how are you, and how did you find the second running of the Las Vegas Grand Prix?
Hello, Dan. I'm fine. Yes, I think you're right. It was a much better event than it was last year. And it was quite nice to see a world champion crowned on a proper Grand Prix this weekend, rather than sprint races we had last year.
Yes, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think last year there was many underwhelming facets of the 2023 title race. 1, that it was basically one-sided. 2, it was over far too soon. And 3, yes, it being on a sprint race doesn't quite have this. It made the Grand Prix itself a bit more of an underwhelming affair, didn't it, last year? So I think Formula One as well itself, as a promoter of the Las Vegas Grand Prix, were probably delighted that the championship was decided here, because if it had gone on, it probably would have been a sprint again, because Qatar coming up this weekend is another sprint weekend. And no doubt if the title race had gone on, it would have been decided on a Saturday once again. Technically, I mean, it was decided on a Saturday this year, being the fact that Las Vegas has a funky time schedule. And I must say, luckily enough, being in the paddock for the weekend, it was a very strange schedule, being in Vegas, it all happening in the middle of the night, going to bed sort of late hours of the morning, waking up for about 3 hours of sunlight, and then becoming dark only sort of just after you've had breakfast or brunch. And then you're sitting around waiting for action to happen much later in the day. But it's a very, I mean, the event itself was a lot of fun, and it's remarkable how they put it on. I mean, hours before sessions begin, there's SUVs and Ubers and taxis going up and down parts of the circuit. It gets closed, and then in 2 hours they have it ready, essentially, which is remarkable. But yes, I think the main attraction wasn't just that, it was Verstappen, and he had pretty simple orders. He needed to beat Lando Norris, or make sure that Norris didn't outscore him by 3 points to secure title number 4. And yeah, as I teased earlier, he joins, I believe, you're going to have to correct me if I'm wrong, Fangio, Michael Schumacher, Sebastian Vettel, and Lewis Hamilton as the only drivers to win 4 in a row. And then obviously, if you add Alain Prost to that list, the only 4-time champions across their entire careers. It looked, I mean, to start with, it did look quite shaky, actually, for Max Verstappen and Red Bull. They didn't have a low enough drag rear wing because of just development choices that they've made with the RB20. So there was obviously a straight line disadvantage, which is quite important around Las Vegas because most of it is very long straights. But McLaren themselves, obviously Lando Norris being his main title rival, they didn't really seem to be at the races either in Vegas. They didn't seem to be coming alive in the cool temperatures. Certain other teams did, which we'll get onto. So Verstappen was able to out-qualify Norris and had a very routine race to finish ahead of him and take his 4th successive world title. And he was rightly quite emotional after the race, and maybe more so than he's ever been. I mean, I think everybody agrees, and I'm sure you will, that this is probably his most impressive title win, or at least equally as impressive as going toe-to-toe with Lewis Hamilton in 2021, given the fact that the Red Bull hasn't been the best car for the majority of the season. So yeah, how did you react to Verstappen taking title number 4, and how do you rank it amongst his 4 titles?
It's quite difficult to quantify because 2021, I would say, it slightly edges it for me in how impressive that was. But of course, everyone kind of forgets about that because of what happened in Abu Dhabi. Um, but I think the fact that he went up against one of the greats and was able to beat him, and I would say just about deservedly so, regardless of Abu Dhabi, makes that slightly more impressive. He went up against someone who's never been in a title fight before, and someone I would say who is not quite well rounded enough to properly challenge for a title yet. Which sounds really harsh, but I think that that's what we've seen this year is that Lando is very fast, and we know he can win races now, but he's just not quite at that level to take someone on like Max.
Certainly, I think I would agree with that. There's been, obviously, I think since Miami, the consensus is that McLaren has been perhaps the strongest car, or overall has had the most weekends where it's in the best position to compete for victories. And in that time, Norris has only won, including Miami, 3 Grand Prix. Maybe he should have won a few more, and that would have made the title race a bit tighter than it was. I think, obviously, Brazil, the last race before Vegas, again, a major swing there. Verstappen doing that stunning drive in the wet from 17th to 1st really sort of nailed the championship back in his favour. Safety car timings obviously helped him, but regardless, he was charging through the pack at some considerable pace and probably still would have beaten Norris on that day without the safety car and the red flag intervention, I should say. That gave him the free pit stop. And Norris obviously made his mistakes in that race as well, didn't he? Going wide at turn 1 and obviously not having the best day at the office. And I think that's been, when you become a title challenger for the first time, some drivers immediately step up to the plate. As you say, in 2021, that was Verstappen's first chance to win a title, and he stepped up to the plate and more to go toe-to-toe with Lewis Hamilton, who had been having the title all to himself up until that point. So perhaps Lando needs to do some reflection and some more development over the winter, and then he's going to be the man who can do a title charge on a more consistent basis. If development stays as it is, McLaren would, you would say, start next year as favourites, and Max's title this year was obviously, a lot of it was based on that first segment of the season when nobody had caught up to Red Bull yet, and he was doing the job, wasn't he? So that's what he did all of last year, was when he was doing the job all year. This year, I think it was 4 out of the first 5 races he won. The only one he didn't win was when his car, exploded in one corner with the rear brakes. So, and he built up that advantage and sort of maintained that advantage. It went up and down, but he maintained it, didn't he? So can Norris do something similar next year if McLaren start as the strongest team? But nobody is going to have an advantage like Red Bull did, I don't think, at the start of the season. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, next year to see what happens and see if Norris can make that development. But the race itself, again, was interesting. Cold temperatures, very cold temperatures, given that it was a night race in the middle of the desert in November. It's going to be cool. And obviously, tyres were the big question mark. Who could manage their tyres? Who could extract pace? And it turns out Mercedes were the team that could extract the most pace. Clean sweep of practice. George Russell taking pole. Lewis Hamilton was probably the man we all thought was going to take pole, but he had 2 mistakes in Q3, which meant he was 10th on the grid. But that didn't matter because he was easily able to breeze through the field in the race to clinch a Mercedes 1-2, and George Russell was untouchable. So Mercedes found their sweet spot, which is what Toto Wolff said post-race, and nobody really had an answer for them, which, given how they've been since the summer break, is quite a remarkable result for Mercedes.
Yeah, and it shows also, despite, taking away the bad qualifying aside, it shows what Lewis Hamilton can do when the car's good, because he seems to have mentally checked out of that team and did a long time ago. So when actually there is a chance for him to do well, he generally takes it. But obviously he was at a disadvantage from messing up qualifying, and George had it virtually on a plate for him. Obviously he had to go out and do the job, which he did. But we've seen before that the Mercedes seems to do well when the temperature is that much cooler than it is somewhere else. The tyres on that car seem to cope better than everyone else's. So it wasn't really a surprise that Mercedes were right up there. it would have just been very interesting to see what would have happened if Lewis had qualified even just a few places higher, whether he could have had a proper battle royale with his teammate like he used to in the old days.
Yeah, I think that would have been really interesting. And the qualifying thing is strange because obviously Q1 was fine, Q2 was fine, and then it came to crunch time, and the man with the most pole positions in F1 history cracked under the pressure. And one thing I'll say about Russell is he is very, very good, or he's become very, very good at delivering when it matters. I mean, Mercedes had a car to win, had a car to be put on pole, and he did those things with relative ease. He wasn't phased by the occasion. So I think showing just how impressive he is. And you could say in Spa, yes, obviously the car got disqualified, but he made that really clever call to go for a one stop and, did it to perfection. He's in these like right places at the right time to pick up podiums or pick up the win in Austria when the stuff happens in front of him. So again, we talk of 2025. That's something that I'm quite interested in seeing how he copes if Mercedes can do a more consistent challenge. But yeah, Lewis, he said it would have been a breeze, was his phrasing had he qualified or done his job on Saturday. Martin Brundle in his Sky F1 column seems to think that George had pace in hand. But with Vegas, obviously the driver's title was wrapped up, but there's still plenty to play for in the Constructors' Championship, particularly for first place between McLaren and Ferrari. Two fallen giants of F1 if it comes to winning titles. They both haven't tasted title success for quite a while. Ferrari's last Constructors coming in 2008 and McLaren's even further back in 1998. A few sort of Spygate fax machine shenanigans stopping them from winning Constructors' Championships sooner. Or later, rather, should I say. And it's down to 24 points, if I'm not mistaken. It's in and around that ballpark. I'm sure someone in comments when this is uploaded on YouTube will be able to correct me if I'm wrong. It's going to take a lot, I think, for Ferrari. I think Ferrari were thinking they were going to have a bit more pace in hand in Vegas, especially in the race, but they didn't. They weren't a match for Mercedes, and especially considering McLaren, who are obviously in the pound seat for the constructors, were really off the pace in Vegas. Ferrari missed an opportunity to, if they'd got a 1-2, then this constructors battle would have been far, far tighter. McLaren will probably be the quickest car in Qatar with its, complex high-speed corners. It could still come down to the last race, but personally, for me, I think McLaren are probably going to comfortably seal this, or slightly uncomfortably maybe seal it in the last race in Abu Dhabi. I think it will go down to the last race, but McLaren won't need much. How do you read the constructors' battle between the two?
Well, I initially said, and I think I remember this rightly, that I backed Ferrari to do it. But it seems to me like there's a battle between three teams who are trying their best not to win it, because you've got Ferrari who have a history now, a long history of being able to strategically mess all of their races up. You've got McLaren who don't really know how to treat their two drivers at the moment, because we have letting them go out and race and then letting Lando get the business done to go for the championship. And now that's not happening. They're probably going to race each other again, which poses a risk in itself. And then you've got Red Bull, which has really got one man in the car who's capable of delivering points at the moment, and the other one seems to be a complete shadow of his former self. So I think it's easy to, not easy, but it's logical to discount Red Bull.
Yes.
I think the logic dictates that maybe it's worth me going back on what I said, and that McLaren are probably more likely to be the ones to do it. But it would be very interesting. As you say, it's been a long time since either of them have done it. So it'd be nice to see one of the two actually get the job done.
Yes, I think, and also we say, it's a long time since one of those huge names has won a constructors' championship. Obviously, Red Bull and Mercedes sort of hogging that title for the last few decades, or decade and a half. What's also, I think, quite good, and we say like the nostalgia there, but also in terms of the season as a whole, it's been a vintage season. We're seeing multiple races being won by multiple teams and multiple drivers, something that hasn't happened for a long time. We've had the most race winners since 2012, which beats the season out by one driver. And then for the first time in F1 history, we've had 4 different teams claim a 1-2 in a single season, which is a pretty impressive stat that Mercedes helped achieve with their 1-2 in Vegas. So I think we've just got not only is it going to be great to see a name like McLaren and Ferrari back on top, it's great just 2024 as a whole as a season. But the constructors' battle isn't just limited to the top of the heap. It's also the fight for sixth, which is generating quite a lot of intrigue, and that's gotten even tighter, if you can believe it, than it was at the end of the Sao Paulo Grand Prix. The favour is back with Haas on 50 points in sixth, Alpine on 49 points, and then RB on 46 points. Alpine really probably should have streaked ahead further, given that Pierre Gasly qualified third, which was incredible performance in Las Vegas, but his engine blew up. And obviously Esteban Ocon just had a weekend of woe. Again, RB, Sonoda qualified ahead of the two Haas machines. So, but, I think we both predicted Haas were going to get this done in an article on the Motorsport Week website. It's looking like maybe they'll just get it over the line. But how can you call it? There's only 1 point between Haas and Alpine. How do you see it playing out over the next two rounds?
Well, it seems to me that Haas have had the more consistent car out of the three teams we've talked about over the course of the season. And actually, Nico and Kevin have done an extremely good job, I think, between them over the whole year. And I think that their added experience probably just about gives them another edge on top of the fact that they've got performance advantage in the car. Alpine have kind of quite often this year sleepwalked in from one disaster into another, but just lately it's picked up. But obviously it went wrong for Gasly in Vegas. I just don't think the RB's got quite the consistent pace that Haas has either. So I would be very surprised if Haas don't nab it now, because I just think that they've got too many aces in their pack compared to everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I think as well, RB, not to a lesser extent of Red Bull, they've only got one driver they can properly rely on. I think in terms of Liam Lawson, obviously he had that really great return in Austin, but his races since haven't really delivered. He's not elevating the team beyond what it was with Daniel Ricciardo in that second seat, and Yuki is obviously just performing at a really high level. So it's going to be more difficult for them because it looks less likely for them to have two cars in the hunt for Q3 appearances or fringe points, where arguably you could say with both the other teams, if the car is capable, they've both got drivers that could, force their hand into Q3 or force their hand into a points-paying position. I mean, that Nico Hulkenberg, if the car's going to be good, he's going to probably qualify in the top 10. Pierre Gasly's been in the top 10 for the last 4 rounds since they upgraded that car in Austin. And for whatever reason, Esteban Ocon's just not gelling with it, or he seems to think that there's something up with it. But I think there's just a man and machine aren't quite gelling there. So I'm leaning towards Haas. But again, it's also hard because it depends on what the top teams are doing. If the top teams lock out all top 8 positions in qualifying, you're only fighting over 9th and 10th. It's like, a maximum of 2 points on offer. That does mean Sergio Perez has to get into Q3, which isn't a guarantee anymore. It's it's going to be really, really close. And if Alpine can get their car to the finish, especially Gasly's car, maybe you'd go with them. I really can't call it, but I think it's going to be between Haas and Alpine. I would say on balance, Haas deserves it, given just over the course of the year. And I think it'd be a really nice send-off for Kevin Magnussen and Nico Hulkenberg leaving that team. Just great for that team in general. They're the smallest team on the grid. Io Komatsu's done a fantastic job as team principal in his first season. Oliver Oakes is doing a fantastic job at Alpine, having only come in August, to be honest. So it'd be great. I think it'd be a great story if Haas can pick off 6th. And that's going to give us a nice segue, actually, because they call themselves America's F1 team. We've had some breaking news of another American F1 team that's finally been granted access to the Grand Prix circus in time for the 2026 season. Previously regarded as the Andretti bid, ran and owned by Michael Andretti, it's now the General Motors bid in terms of name and predominantly the way it's going to be sort of packaged, branded and run. So Cadillac are joining F1 in 2026. And this has all sort of gone from 0 to 100 really quickly. So in the Las Vegas paddock, it's sort of, Associated Press, I think, were the first to drop it, saying that the Andretti bid is now the General Motors Cadillac bid. It's picked up pace, and an announcement is due, and that announcement came on Monday. And the reason these things have changed is obviously Michael Andretti in September stepped away from basically day-to-day operations at Andretti's, and then Dan Torres, who's is taken over as the majority owner and decision maker, and then he quickly made a decision to sort of bring in the General Motors involvement even more than it is. So it's basically it's the Andretti team, but they're sort of doing the behind the scenes work, but it's the General Motors works entry, which F1 sort of took a greater shine to. So they've said yes to the bid, but there's obviously a little bit more to it, given that when Andretti were rejected commercial terms, Michael Andretti, that is, at the start of the year, US Department of Justice has got involved as a probe of it, being, is it fair? So I think F1 also wants to sort of dodge any potential bad press with the US Department of Justice as well. But I mean, I'm personally quite happy to see an 11th team join the grid. I think the fact that it's Cadillac name, General Motors, that's really, really good. They're going to be bringing their own engine in time for 2028. We could potentially get an American driver and Colton Herta. So I think it ticks quite a lot of boxes for me. How do you see the way it's developed, and also how do you just see it as a whole?
Well, I'm really happy because I think that it was, I was very much a backer of the Andretti bid for a long time, and I felt it was stupid that Formula One were just rejecting it out of hand on several occasions, particularly given it seemed to be like a bit of an open goal Formula One was missing. That they to some extent Americanized this sport quite a lot in the hope that that's what it's going to, it's going to appeal to that particular fan base, and they weren't accepting an American team, which I think would have probably picked up immediately the same amount of support that Haas have got, because Haas don't really have an awful lot in America. So I think it was about time. And yeah, it brings a whole wealth of opportunities for them in terms of, what sort of branding we're going to get for the car. The fact that we could have another American driver in the team, and perhaps, maybe, no offense to Logan, but one that maybe deserves to be on the grid a bit more, and whoever else is going to get in the second seat. I mean, they say that they want someone experienced and someone American alongside them, but that opens up quite a lot of debate for whoever's going to get the second seat.
Yes, I mean, there's going to be plenty of drivers in 2025 who I think are going to be barging down on the door at the satellite site that Andretti have already set up in Silverstone. I think Valtteri Bottas has probably got to be top of their list. 10-time Grand Prix winner, plenty of experience, and also in these last few years, his personality's really shone through. So in terms of a marketable asset, he's obviously, which is a very important part of F1 these days. I think he's also a good driver to pin your hopes on. You've then got to say, I think Daniel Ricciardo's probably got to be in the conversation. His fandom in the American F1 fans is huge. I think he's maybe still got something to give, and perhaps given the way his exit was in RB, he needs a proper farewell, and maybe just a hard reset with a new team would be just the thing for him. But then you've got drivers like Kevin Magnussen as well, who's obviously a safe pair of hands. Obviously, is probably known to all of the drivers are known to the American market now, given F1's growth there. So there's plenty of names that I think are going to be circling that second seat alongside potentially Colton Herta, if he can get the FIA super license points, which is what stopped him from getting that AlphaTauri drive in 2023. Yes. If you were to pick your lineup, who would you pick?
Well, I think Mick Schumacher should be given a chance to prove himself again. The surname still carries a lot of weight. It's a huge surname, and to go alongside a new team, I think, would be very, very, it's very marketable, as we said, which is very important. Ricciardo and Bottas, I think you're right. They're going to be very firmly in the mix. I think that Perez could be as well, if he manages to stick around for next year, and he keeps his foot in the door. I think he's going to be very much on the radar. If they can find someone with that sort of experience, whoever it is, then yeah, their focus will go into finding an American driver. I think Herta's probably the most likely, if he can get the points. I'd have to look into how he can go about getting those points, but I think he's probably the most likely. I don't think there's anyone else that's going to want to give up an IndyCar seat just yet for a shot at a team that's very nascent, and you still have no idea how well they're actually going to do.
Yeah, I think Herta, well, he had his best season to date in IndyCar in 2024, second in the championship. Of course, he's been with Andretti since 2020 as well. So he's their sort of young star. He's still only 24 years of age as well. So he's got youth on his side. Obviously, it's still quite, in F1 terms, that's probably a late debut now, but he's certainly a talented driver. And I do think he can't be far away from the super license points. I think if he has another year like he had in 2024, then perhaps he'll get the job done in terms of super license points. I mean, another name is Franco Colapinto. Obviously, he made his place on the 2025 grid is by no means a guarantee, is it? I mean, if you look at the contracts as they are on the table, there isn't a seat for him. Certain things have to fall into place for him to find his way onto the grid next year. Obviously, a big Latin American draw there, so that could work. But then a Colapinto Herta lineup's very inexperienced. But do you need how much experience do you need? I think if the speed's there, then potentially that's good. But then, given the certain things that have happened at Williams recently, maybe GM and Cadillac won't want to pay the crash bill so much to begin with, because Colapinto's obviously been running high risk strategy recently. I think in a way to impress, but thankfully he's been okay, because there's been some really nasty incidents, and luckily he's walked away from both of them. Obviously, you said as well there that you thought it was sort of a no-brainer to welcome Andretti into F1 from the beginning. I think the way it's been seen from F1 is there's been a personality clash. I think the way that Michael Andretti was going about trying to get into the sport, sort of being quite maybe loud about his intentions in the press, in the media, but not necessarily speaking to the right people in the right manner, I think maybe rubbed some people up the wrong way. And I think the proof of what value does Andretti as a name bring into Formula One, I think that was obviously, and the value thing was what was put in the rejection when Michael sort of had his talks with FOM after being past muster with the FIA. Obviously, General Motors being the name of the team, Cadillac being the name of the team from the outset, obviously brings with it way more sort of cachet, way more beyond the sport as well. Cadillac's a major automotive brand. General Motors itself, I think, is the 5th biggest car seller on the planet. So there it transcends sport in terms of a marketable asset, and maybe bringing more fans in that way. So I think that's sort of where things have changed, and why the no has turned into a yes, beyond the US Department of Justice stuff. So yeah, a lot to look forward to there. And also there's a lot to look forward to in the short term, because we've got a Grand Prix coming up straight away with Qatar, the final sprint weekend of the year. Qatar last year was a bit earlier in the year and a lot hotter. Looking at the temperatures now that it's the last weekend of November / first weekend of December, it's going to be a little bit cooler, which I think is a godsend for all the drivers, given how horrible the conditions were last year. It looks like McLaren will be favourites. So maybe Lando can get a statement victory in response to losing the title race. What are you looking forward to Qatar? How do you rate it as an F1 venue? And what do you think is going to come from the race, if you can predict that sort of thing in 2024?
Well, if you look back to last year, it was really the first really big statement made by Oscar Piastri, because he won the sprint race and announced himself. And I think if he does that again, given McLaren's status as favourites, as you say, I think it leaves McLaren with such a problem going into next year, because he's developing at such a rate. There is no reason to not rule him out for championship contention next year. So if he can make a statement again this year in Qatar and do that, then that, I think, really puts the cat amongst the pigeons just within the team. But I like the track. It's a proper good circuit for racing. I'm not particularly a fan of some of the more newfangled circuits we have on the calendar, but I do like the Qatar circuit. It has hosted a lot of other races in other categories in the past, and it's always thrown up something pretty interesting. So I like it being on the calendar. And yeah, I think now the pressure's off Red Bull. It'll be interesting to see what other teams can go out and do, and what results might get thrown up.
Yeah, I think the narrative is going to steer away from them, isn't it? And it's going to be more on what can Ferrari and McLaren do in terms of the constructors, which is good that we've, us as the media, and then as fans as well, there's something still to sink our teeth into for these last two races. Now that Verstappen's wrapped up a fourth F1 title, but I think that feels like a good and natural place to end. So, Jack, thank you for joining me today, and listeners and watchers, thank you for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe, whether you're watching this on YouTube or you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you find us. And make sure you keep up to date with Motorsport Monday and motorsportweek.com, and follow us on socials at Motorsport Week. We're on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, you name it. You can find us there. So thank you very much, and goodbye.